Hi everybody, I'm Shane Sandlak, and this is my painting of Victor Ravocrath, a Tiefling Shadow Sorcerer. So you can see me here just kind of blocking in basic shapes for the character himself. I wanted him to have a very cocky pose, but I started out a bit too plain. Kind of just moving the arms around, tilting the head, the neck, putting in like basic shapes for anatomy. Haven't actually done a lot of tieflings in the past. This is actually only my second one, but I thought they were pretty interesting looking as a race. It's cool to have that demon blood in there. You'll see me just adding the clothes layer by layer here. I started with the underclothes with his vest and his white shirt. Now I've just kind of got his trench coat / coat just over that. I wanted it kind of like breaking off into like a shadowy form just to show that shadow sorcerer, though I do that pretty much nearly at the very end. Here I'm just messing around with the belts. He's got two daggers on his hip. They're supposed to be kind of ornate, almost decorative daggers. So I'm just going with the basic belts here. It's like nothing really makes sense at this point. I just want like the silhouette and the shapes to look good. And then I'll kind of figure that out afterwards. So I'm kind of like hanging them in different directions, off the hip in a V shape, down. Still ways that he could grab them easily off his hip, but maybe that looks a little more interesting visually. Tossed a little component pouch on there as well. He's a sorcerer, he's got magic items, so. The person who commissioned this actually had very specific items in mind for certain parts, like the boots and the jacket were very specific. I actually kind of like that sometimes. It frees me up to more just think of like how it's going to fit on the character and like make it look cool. If you have too much freedom, sometimes you can just, there's so many options out there, you can get lost. This particular tiefling actually had his real horns removed, so he's got like these gazelle horns kind of tied around his head. You can't really see it because his hair goes over top of it, but I thought that was a cool little detail, so tried to really pop them up there. You see me kind of like struggling with the face here. The expression, I know the expression in my head that I want, but it usually takes me quite a while to just carve it out, I suppose. I always find myself spending a bit too much time on the face, but it's a focal point, so it's not wasted. So you'll see here I just kind of drop in basically an arrow to represent where the light's going to be coming from. I like to sometimes do this early, just so I can kind of plan out how the lighting's going to end up looking. So you can see here I kind of like drew quickly. It was like, okay, these are going to be the brightest spots on the character, the focal points mostly. So I've got the basic idea down and I'm moving on to tight lines at this point. I find if I really want like a very polished product in the end, it helps if I do really tight lines. takes all the guesswork out of the rendering, and I can just kind of autopilot at that point. Make different decisions later on, but if I work out all the problem areas ahead of time, it's just saves me a lot of effort in the end. So I use a very uniform pen when I'm doing this. Typically I would have like more of a line weight if I'm doing something like just lines and like cell shading. But since I know I'm not going to basically have any of the lines left over at the end, I just want a very clean cut, almost robotic line to it. Work out all the details here. Just kind of popping in the ridges for the gazelle horns. You'll see later on that it saves quite a bit of time, once, especially the way I do the colors. And just fill a lot of these areas really quickly, do a quick lighting pass. So since this guy is actually known as a gambler, he gambles a lot, loves gold, I thought it'd be kind of interesting to change the buttons to maybe card suits. Kind of like a subtle detail you're not really going to notice, unless you look really closely, but I like tossing those kinds of things in, just to kind of tell the character's story. So mostly just filling in details at this point. I'll usually have reference open for things I'm not like super well versed in. Clothing, fashion isn't a super big interest of mine, but it's super important for characters, so definitely something I've made an effort to learn more about. Here I'm just kind of working on the hands. As a lot of artists will say, hands are difficult, doesn't matter how good you are. But I find lately I've been having more confidence in them, just in the way I've kind of broken them down. You'll see I kind of popped his pinky up. It's just to help with the silhouette. I find it more interesting to look at than rather just have his pinky down for no reason. Giving him those big ornate cuffs just on the coat there. So you'll see I add seams to the coat sometimes during the line art, but a lot of the time I'll leave that till the rendering. It's easier just to draw a line then, but sometimes I want to remember that I'm going to put a seam, so. The other hand I popped in here. Yeah, I was pretty happy with these two hands in general. Actually shot reference for this one that I was working on here, and it ended up saving me a lot of time. You'll see I often pop things on different layers just so I can make use of digital. It's something that's unique to digital. You can kind of just draw over and erase out what you don't need. Saves a ton of time. I'm sure there was a better way for me to do this, but I couldn't think of it, so I did it kind of the hard way here. You can see me kind of fiddling with the edges, just I fanned some cards out and was like, okay, it doesn't look like that. Gotta fix that. Tossing the card suits on his jacket buttons on the cuffs there as well. So here I've made another layer, and again I'm just kind of drawing over things. I'll erase out what I don't need. The belts, fairly standard belts. I just wanted them to hang right. And added the extra component pouch there just because I thought it was interesting. And since he's a sorcerer, I thought I'd add some spell scrolls in here just to break up the silhouette, and just seems like something he would have there is like, oh, spell scroll in the middle of combat, pull it out, easy access. Yeah, you'll notice I flip the character very frequently during the painting, but I did flip it upside down there. You'll notice mistakes when you flip things, and it's a lot harder to do it up and down, I find. And you'll definitely notice some things if you do that every now and then. So I started on the daggers here. They're supposed to be fairly ornate. I still wanted them to be usable though, so I gave them a fairly solid looking handle on both. But I thought that I'd just etch in different patterns on each of them just to make them look a little fancier. Since I've already done the underdrawing detailed enough, I can just kind of lay things on top of it. I find it's a lot easier to draw that way. It's like, okay, the belt will wrap around this way, or the holster will just hang that way. If I don't do it and I just kind of wing it, things can look a little off. So I like to just kind of like build on top of things like this. Kind of put his other dagger a bit behind his spell scrolls there. He's a sorcerer, so he's usually going to be casting, but I want him to still have easy access to his daggers, so I put one a little further ahead so he could grab that one easier, but he's still got pretty easy access to the second one there. Just added a little leg band there for visual interest and not have just basic trousers. Wanted them a bit baggy, but they're still going to be, his boots are going to be worn over his pants, so it'll bunch up at the end, and that'll be interesting on its own at the bottom, so I don't really need to add anything there. But I also didn't want everything so busy that you just don't know where to look. I find that can sometimes be a problem, and some people really like that style. I like a bit of a mix. If you look at a lot of, say, Pathfinder artwork, you'll notice they have, like, giant backpacks full of stuff, which is true to the actual characters, and when you're playing, you carry a ton of stuff you don't need. But, just visually, I find it a bit too busy. I like details, but, it overdoes it, in my opinion. Yeah, so I've made it down to the boots here. Like I said earlier, he had very specific boots in mind. I thought they were pretty cool. The pouches on the side there don't seem super practical. They're visually interesting, at least. Kind of got that Final Fantasy belt buckles and just straps hanging everywhere, but I didn't want to go quite that far. Still wanted most of these things to be mostly practical. So I'm just kind of going back and cleaning things up a little. You'll see me just kind of working on the basic shapes of the boots there. You can see me here just kind of freehanding the tail. Eventually I just spend enough time here. I'm like, well, I'm doing digital here. I'm in Clip Studio. They've got a pretty good curve tool. Let's just use that. Just the ease of access where you can spend the time doing it manually, and you will eventually get it. It's just, why would you when you don't have to? So I ended up just having the coat kind of like blowing that way. Like I said, I'm going to be adding like a shadow like leaking out of it, or it's kind of like morphing into a shadow at the end. But for now, I just wanted to block it in. Very basic shapes, like how the coat would be without that. I can just add that stuff later during the painting. Looked at a couple more reference pictures here. It's like it wasn't hanging right on his legs. So I kind of readjusted things, made him a bit skinnier. Made the shape more interesting, I thought. So I just did any random design for the back of the card. Just something I thought would look cool. Wanted to separate it for later, so when I do color I can just select it and change the color easily. Alright, so I finished up the tight lines. Moving on to blocking in the color here. I'll usually put like the major things on their own layer, just so I can select them easier later. Yeah, so here you'll see me, I did the horns on their own layer. I'll do the skin on its own separate layer as well. Hair, etc., etc. I just do this so I can have them saved, and then I'll mostly be working on one layer for the most part when I'm just painting later. But if I wanted to select something, get a really hard edge, I can just go back, control click on it, and then it selects the colored area that I've already set out before. Makes it easier just for that kind of thing. So since the person that hired me actually had a specific coat and boots in mind, those colors were kind of already decided. So I just kind of picked things that I thought would be complementary otherwise. It wouldn't really stand out, but would match it. Fairly standard colors for the most part, you know, brown leather, kind of a beige vest. I figured I'd let the lighting do most of the interesting work here. So I'm just laying out the flats, and you'll see me just kind of block everything in. I just changed the background to like a slightly off gray, just so I could see spaces I was missing. And I think it's more, it's easier to look at than just like stark white. And you can miss things on stark black, so. So I turn my lighting layer back on from earlier, and I just kind of put in a cool blue shadow over everything, and I'll draw out the highlights here. Not going to be too specific at this point. It does give you like a general idea of where the light's going to be hitting the strongest, and then I can kind of blend it later. Just like the colors, I like to block it out like this because I can just change it later on if I want to. I can just select all the shadows. If I want to like put in a very warm tone or a rim light or something like that, it's a lot easier to do when I do it like this. So I was thinking it's kind of coming in through like a, I don't know, a broken skylight or a window just up top there. It's more interesting than just like one column of light hitting him. So you'll see it like broken up a little over his body there during down on his leg there. And here I'm just kind of like blending some of the softer edges on the face. Just putting in a bit of the bounce light here. Draw it in a bit stronger than it'll actually be. You'll hardly notice it later on, but if it wasn't there, it seems a little flat. And I toss on a desaturate layer just on top so I can see the values. Everything's working properly like that. So there you could see that I selected the shadows and then just Control-I'd the selection, so I could just paint in a warm light, hitting him in the bright spots. And just to visually draw the eye more towards the face, I kind of darken from the feet up, just like a gradient. You'll see a lot of people do that just to kind of punch the areas they want to stand out more. So I'm just working on a multiply layer over top of everything, just slowly working up the forms of everything. You'll see me pop in the shadows for certain things like the hands, the fingers, the coat, and just kind of like smooth away things. I'll start pretty stark and then I'll lower it, and then I'll just build another layer on top of that. It's kind of slow, and it can take a while to work this way, but I find the forms are a little more easily defined and make less mistakes when you do it slowly like this. Definitely once you're more experienced, so you can just like lay in the thick black areas, and it'll definitely be faster. You'll definitely notice that I'm working black and white here because I'm just painting a desaturated warm multiply layer over top of everything. And since it's all in one layer, I can also change that later as well. So you'll see me there just going back to my color layers. I selected just the pants so I could just work on them, not have anything outside of that area. Makes it just so the clean edges stay clean. I was kind of rethinking the light on the leg there, just like, did I want to keep it or not? I decided to in the end, but yeah, it would have still been fine without it. It's just, I like to experiment while I'm going along. You'll see me like pop different layer types on, just things that I wouldn't think would work otherwise, just to see if any kind of happy accidents pop out or spark an idea. Here I was kind of working on like making maybe some like magical glow from his hands, but I don't end up using it in the end. I thought it'd be a bit too busy. So here you can see, even after I've turned the lines off, you can still pretty much make everything out, which is the goal. Eventually you're not really going to see the lines almost at all. I'll just kind of be painting over them at a certain point. But I want that part to be as quick as possible, so I've already done most of the underpainting. As you'll see here, I turn it off every now and then. So here I'll turn the lines almost completely off again. Just kind of see where everything's sitting. It's coming together pretty well. I noticed that some of the edges aren't quite as sharp as I'd like, and I'll fix that up as I'm overpainting everything. But even with the lines off, you can still make out what everything is and the basic shadows and planes of everything, so. This is all the time I was talking about earlier that I saved rather than me having to paint it one at a time, just without the lines. So you'll see me here start to color a couple of the lines just where the light's hitting it, so it would normally be disappearing. And eventually I'll just make a copy of everything, paste it on top, and just paint it all in one layer. But here I'm still coloring the lines just to kind of blend in with everything. More tweaking of the overall like color, like if I want it more warm or more cool. Because of the way I work, it's easier for me to switch back and forth between how I want it, and my mind changes constantly, so you'll see that a lot throughout this painting. Yeah, so here we are. I'm copying pretty much everything onto one layer, and this is where I'm going to start painting over everything, where the lines are going to start to disappear a little more. Did a little work on the hair here. You can see more of the bounce sliding because I figure it's more of a shiny. He takes care of his hair. He's got good product. And did a little more work on the teeth here. I find if you define every tooth, it gives it kind of a creepy look, so I just subtly drew them in there, and you'll see me kind of like walking it back a bit. Yeah, it's a good way to make a villain or someone you just want to have like an almost eerie feeling. If you like really punch the teeth, it can look very awkward. Kind of just worked on the scar where his horn was removed. A subtle detail, you're not really going to really notice it unless you know the character's story. I was just messing around with perhaps pumping up the intensity of the lights. I didn't decide to in the end. I think I kind of dull it down at the end here, but you'll see. It's just an idea I was toying with. More rendering on the hands. I didn't want to go too overboard because you're not going to notice the detail when you're zoomed out, but I find if you put a little detail into it, you'll definitely be able to tell the difference. So I start fleshing out the horns here, start rendering them a bit more. Kind of just painting in the details, overpainting the lines. You can see they pretty much disappear at this point. Gave them a bit more shadows on the sides there. They were looking a bit too flat, so I pump up the highlights as well. Figured they'd be a different, shinier texture to them. And you'll see me just kind of going in here for the shinier metallic surfaces, the buttons, the horns as well. Just wanted to add like that extra bit of bounce light. Gives it that more 3D feeling to it. Again, not something you're really going to notice unless you know what to look for, but if it wasn't there, it definitely looks flatter than it would otherwise. And yeah, pretty much his top half is pretty much done at this point, other than the cards. I think I make a couple of tweaks later on, but now it's just working on the belts. I decided to redesign one of the belt straps here at the end, but nothing super major or anything. Lots of gradual build-up just of the values. I'll start kind of a darker tone, but not black, and then I can just darken it as I go and lighten things. I was actually thinking of adding some designs to the paper just to show like some of the spells that might be on it, but figured it'd draw the attention even more than I would want it to, so I just kept them folded on the inside. I ended up using a bit of a rougher brush earlier on the pants, so it gave it that textured feel, and here I'm just painting over top just to get the general lighting down. You'll see I kind of add like almost like a second outline to where the light hits. Just makes it look more interesting. And here's me redesigning that belt strap. So I'm just painting over my lines here. Kind of like a brushed metal look. I wanted them to look fairly ornate, but still usable, so I like the design. I'm just kind of making up as I go here. Give it a fancier look, maybe something of elven design. The person who hired me didn't actually specify that part, so headcanon mostly. There's that color selection coming in handy again, just selecting the tail there so I could get a nice clean line. You could still paint it and get the same effect, but I find the effort would be wasted that way. Almost finished the rendering for the most part, just down to the boots, mostly the leather on the boots. But since they're not a huge focal point, I wanted to add enough detail that they're not going to be out of place, but I didn't go crazy or anything. So I thought the leg strap just didn't come across as a decorative thing at this point, so I added like a small design to it. See me just kind of kicking around ideas here until I find something I like. Didn't want to stand out too much though, which it does for a little while here, so I'll bump down the opacity. And just kind of erase out what I didn't like. Make it a little more subtle, but shows that it isn't just part of his pants. Alright, so we're coming near the end here. You can see that selection coming in handy again with the cards. This part, again, was a bit of a struggle. Probably an easier way to do this in hindsight, but definitely took the long road here. So you'll see I just flip the piece upside down and flip it back that way. I just draw like a very basic medieval looking Joker. You're not even really going to see it, so it's more for my own benefit than anything else, but most of it actually gets cut off by his fingers, but just the little details. I find it's worth it in the end. Getting rid of the lines. And then just adding some shadows there to give it more depth. Looked too flat without them. So we're finally on to the shadow portion of his coat here. Since he is a shadow sorcerer, I wanted to add this little bit at the end here. The commissioner actually wanted it just kind of like leaking out of the coat. I thought it'd be kind of cool if it was just like his coat was transforming into shadow as well as coming out. Yeah, so you'll see me just kind of like push shapes around here. Looked at like smoke reference, that kind of thing. Looks pretty bad at first, but just like anything else, once you built it up for a while, you can kind of get why it's looking wrong. And you'll see me just kind of like pushing and pulling shapes here for a while. I'll turn off layers and see if that was the layer that was causing the problem or not. But that'll pretty much do it. Here you'll just see me adding a little bit of rim light, a little tiny highlight to certain things, just one final detail pass to go over everything. But at this point, that's pretty much it done. Thanks for checking out the video, guys. Like and subscribe. You know, do all the YouTube things. And any comments, critiques, anything you'd like to see in the future, just let me know. You can follow me. You'll see all my social media stuff in the description. Thanks for checking out the video, and I'll see you guys next time.